Hey Bat fans, Luke here, ready to Bat chat about another Bat book, and today we're going to take a look at the story, The Many Deaths of the Batman. The Many Deaths of the Batman, which occurred in the pages of Batman, Volume 1, issues 433 to 435, and it was written by Jim Byrne and art by Jim Aparo. Now, this story it's an interesting story. A little bit behind why the story was written, why Jim Byrne actually went through this story. It's actually explained pretty well in the introduction of this trade here, where we have kind of an intro provided by Denny O'Neil, who was actually the editor at the time. Then we have thoughts by Jim Byrne, the writer, and thoughts by Jim Aparo, the artist. But what Denny O'Neil actually approached Jim Byrne to do was, at the time, there was about a 3-issue hole that needed to be filled in between stories. So O'Neil approached him and said, hey, we have this 3-issue kind of hole we'd like you to fill, and we'd kind of like you to sit there and focus a little bit more on fleshing out some of the origins of Batman. So Jim Byrne, most of you will know of his work by Superman, kind of took this on, and the angle he wanted to do, again, kind of focus on some of those origins of Batman, is kind of focus on the mentors that help Batman become Batman. So make that part of the central part of the story, and for some, this should seem somewhat familiar. We've seen this recently in Detective Comics with Peter Tomasi with that story. I forget, can't remember what exactly. I think it's mythology. I think was the name of the actual storyline. Was led right up to issue 1000, and in that story, what was happening is that there was someone that was hunting down all these mentors of Batman and killing them. And not to really go too more in depth in that story, because I'd like everyone to get a chance to read it on its own. You find there's a little bit of a twist on what is reality, and I'll kind of leave it at that. And that's another case of Tomasi recently kind of reaching back in some of these great Batman stories, or into the prior Batman stories, and kind of incorporating them to modern storytelling. An example, like I did in my last video, Batman Year 2, which dealt with the Reaper, and Detective Comics, Tomasi using that character from Year 2 and Mike W. Barr. And again, using a similar concept he's doing in that story mythology, kind of similar to this. Now, I don't know if there's a direct corollary between that story and Byrne's work here. We'll see. That trade is getting ready to come out. I don't know if it'll be some sort of introduction, some special features, back matter that kind of Tomasi uses to kind of explain the origins behind that concept of the story. But be that as it is, it's a very similar concept between that story and this story here. And right off the bat, one of the many strengths of this story, behind it's a good concept. It's also, it's a good concept, but what's also good about it is the detective story. This is Batman trying to piece the clues to figure out a mystery, in this case a murder mystery. But make no mistake, the best part about this is Jim Aparo's art. And the thing that makes it even better is that this 3-issue story, the first part of it, save one panel, is nothing more than a silent issue. This is just letting Jim Aparo do what he does so well, playing to his strengths, and let the story be told through his expertise, his craft, and that can be done really well. You've seen this most recently in probably the best silent issue I ever read. Was Batman and Robin issue number 18. During the New 52, that comes right off the heels of Damian's death and Batman Incorporated, and that was done by Peter Tomasi and artist Patrick Gleason. And Gleason was given a lot of room to run, just given the general context of the story, and let the art tell the story pretty much on its own, through great action, through great physical execution as far as the character models, and just through emotion. Let the story be told through that medium. So it can be done, and in this case, that first part of the issue is done really well. You see the death of Batman, and then You see the police being called to the scene to come and investigate and then bring Batman to the hospital. The hospital staff do the best they can to save Batman. Unfortunately, it's not enough. You see the news reporter come in, get a sneak picture in the morgue, and then that gets released out through the media. And all these individuals getting word that Batman has perished. Even Dick Grayson, him at the time in the Teen Titans, in this case with Starfire, finding out that, hey, Batman's dead, and you can kind of see his emotion. And then you see Alfred just bringing up Bruce's breakfast as normal, but sees this, and then you can see the terror that comes to his mind when he finds out about it. And then Commissioner Gordon hearing about it. It's just excellently done. And in the intro part of the story, just Jim Aparo just flexing his muscles as a storyteller, not just a great artist. So that is one of the pluses in this. Overall, the concept of the story, again, is that there's multiple Batmen dying out there. And what we find out is that these people all die, and they all have a matter of expertise. The very first person we see in the story, the person is actually a bodybuilder, but he's beaten up, beaten to death, and left hung. We see there's a person who's actually a stock car driver. And the second death, or actually no, he might be the third death. The second death is Batman being killed by an explosive. That person turns out to be an explosive expert. One person found in the river was the stock car driver, but unfortunately for him, this kind of gets into some of the contrivances. That was actually he was a paraplegic. We'll get into that part of the story here in a minute. You see someone show up in here, and the Batman person showing up as Batman is actually a gymnast, and then he's killed while performing his gym routine at the local gym there by Arrow. And then we find out the person who's an Arrow, the person. There's all these experts, and they somehow, most of them, connect on kind of building on each other as far as kind of looking for a motive as for the murder overall. Bruce Wayne gets linked into this in a very weird way, to be perfectly honest. But at the end, we find out is that there's a connection. Is that all these experts, all these people dressing up as Batman, were actually mentors of Batman himself. And Batman at some point is able to identify that. So it's a rush between the GCPD initially trying to find out who's killing all these Batman killers, and meanwhile at the same time Batman's trying to piece the clues together of who's killing all of his mentors and why. The big twist at the end is that, and I won't really discuss who the individual is, but we'll just say that the one that actually is behind all this is one of Batman's former mentors. And I don't want to say who it is, because if you have any reason or desire to read this particular story, is that gets fleshed out at the very end, and that's really the ending of the story. And if you kind of know who it is early on, it just kind of tarnish it, because this is one where you kind of need to have all those external negative influences definitely on the sideline to get some enjoyment out of this. And I'll get to that in a minute. The concept is a good story. Where Byrne kind of falters a little bit in here is definitely, I think, in the execution. The fact that he only had 3 issues to tell the story, I think, kind of hampers it a little bit, because the connection between the murder victims, Batman actually going out using the detective skills to kind of go through and analyze and synthesize all the clues, if any, to be honest. There really wasn't no clues out there to be seen for Batman to deduce who it was until the very end. If Byrne had some more time, maybe that part of the story could have been flushed out a little bit. But that's mainly the thing. I think him being hampered by only 3 issues and him trying to tell this story in particular didn't really serve as a favor for him. For him to execute this to a good degree, he probably needed at least 5, maybe 6 issues to kind of flush all these details out. Because really, as the story goes along, I could see, I picture myself in Jim Byrne's office, him on his dry erase board, kind of just, mind mapping, or just sketching out the concept of the story, and just kind of like a timeline, and kind of like, hey, this needs to happen. These are the key events that need to be done throughout to kind of get this story done in 3 issues. And I think the roadmap was okay, but it's just the details to support that timeline, and the amount of time necessary, or the amount of time given, was not necessarily done well. So the concept was there, and you can kind of see it, how all these people are identified as mentors of Batman, and the connection between why these things are happening and the motive. It gets kind of chunky. How Bruce Wayne is thrown in. Bruce Wayne actually is a victim of attempted murder in this. Someone actually tries to kill Batman, and you find out the reason why Bruce Wayne was targeted was to kind of throw off the police in a manner it just felt kind of goofy, to be perfectly honest. Because it starts off, it just seems random, but eventually you see the victims build on each other, like I was trying to say. The gymnast is killed by someone who's uses a crossbow. There happens to be then someone who shows up brought into Gotham by, in this case, Bruce Wayne, that this person is actually a crossbow expert. So like, oh, it must be him. And then there's someone who's killed by that same person's killed by poison. And like, there it is. That's you. What Byrne, I think, attempted to do was show all these people, kind of like Tomasi did in a way, but really show, hey, this person was a mentor of Batman. He was killed by this method. This method is, I'll just use an example, explosives. The person, we can now connect the person who's as a possible suspect as an expert in explosives. That person is killed by the crossbow. So you kind of see what Byrne, I think, was trying to get at, but it was really executed not that well, to be perfectly honest. Another thing that kind of threw me off in the story, I don't know if it was an editor snafu in this or not, but it just didn't. It will strike you. I reread this, and then I kind of went back and reflected on it a little bit, and I kind of got stuck on this particular detail, and it just, even to now, it's just, I don't know what was the reasoning behind it, and I gotta sit there and find it. I wish I could have marked it. But it's Jim Gordon kind of reflecting on all these people are dying, and what the heck is going on. It's right here. Okay, so it just doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. 4 dead men, each one an expert in his particular field. Jenner, the expert driver. Stone, the demolition expert. Kinsley, the chemistry whiz. LaSalle, the bodybuilder. And at this point, there's only been 3 murders. It's Jenner, the expert driver. That's the person, we'll get into that in a minute, who drowned, but he was a paraplegic. So there's that. Stone, the expert, the demolition expert, that's the person who died second. Right there. LaSalle, the bodybuilder, that was the very first one. The opening part of the story. That's LaSalle. And he's mentioned this Kingsley, the chemist whiz. The chemist whiz doesn't get reference to the latter part of the story, where also leads into the connection at the very end, where Batman's able to determine who the big bad behind all this is. So at the time, Gordon's referencing 4 people, and there's only been 3. So I don't know if that was an editor snafu or what, Denny O'Neil, or what. It's kind of had an issue there. Another thing that kind of threw me off, this might be me making something bigger out of it as it is. It wasn't flushed out at least. So Batman's in this scene here. This goes into the death of the the paraplegic who drowned. So we have Batman chasing this red-hooded, red-caped individual. They both fall into the river, and at this point, this is where police pull up Batman, so they assumed he drowned. At this point, there's the one in the corner people say, hey, this person was actually a paraplegic, so he couldn't have been running around the rooftops. And oh, by the way, he drowned with fresh water in his system, so body was planted. So you're assuming this happened in Gotham. Meanwhile, we see Batman carrying the red-caped individual, turning them into the police, but the police is actually in France. So I don't know if this meant that Batman actually got the person they fell in the river, and the person who's behind all this saw that and planted a body there. And then Batman brought that red-caped individual to France. At that point, he found out that someone saying he was dead. Or this all happened in France and somehow this got moved back to Gotham. It was just one where that was not flushed out very well at all, to be perfectly honest. There is a twist with this scene right here. The explosive, I'll just kind of leave it at that, just saying it's not all that it appears. And then there's one scene was actually I thought was pretty interesting, and it leads to again how Batman finds out the big bad behind all this, but how it was flushed out. There again, there's that plot contrivance. The whole explanation of how Batman deduces definitely who it was literally summed up at the very end. And I mean the very end. I mean literally the very end, the last page and a half, where Batman deduces, hey, this is how I found you. And it goes back to something in the middle of the story. And that detail was not flushed out at all. It was just like, hey, this is how everything's come together, and here's why. So overall, the storytelling, it's again, great concept. It's just the details are not flushed out at all. The storytelling development in this was severely lacking. Art was great. Don't get me wrong. The art is great. You're gonna love that first issue. That's just, if you love Jim Aparo art, I mean, there you go. This really Jim Aparo playing to his absolute strengths in this. Again, a detective story, Batman and the detective element, those are always fun. They're always fun. But again, the execution. Part of me wants to sit there and say, I mean, for those who just got into Batman and you're just used to the modern storytelling version of Batman, you just kind of have to kind of keep in mind this is 1989-ish. It's a different mode of storytelling, and it's just different. And plus, if you could just go into this as just a fun Batman story and just kind of let your analytical eye and your critical thinking kind of go off to the side and just enjoy a story for what it is. It's a fun story. I had fun. I had fun reading it, but I just couldn't help using through a critical eye, just picking up some of the things. It's like, really? Okay, but yeah. So overall, interesting twist in this. I just wish that explanation could have been kind of developed and explained a little more. It was a fun read, but again, you kind of have to just keep your critical eye off to the side and just go into this. Just want to read a fun detective Batman story. This is one where you get to the end, you're going to have to sit there and kind of go back and say, okay, I know the end now, try to piece everything together, and some of the things aren't just, they're just not going to connect. So again, it's that critical thinking. You're just going to have to leave that at the door, kind of go into this and just kind of take it at face value as a good story, fun story, 3 issues. I mean, you don't get this too often. A 3-issue story, short and pretty fun. Again, if you just leave the critical thinking out of it. Overall, would I recommend this one? Sure. However, the grade I'm going to give it, I'm not going to give it that grade and still recommend it. I'll say why I recommend it here in a minute. Grade or whatever, I give this a 1.75 out of 5. It's just the execution of the story was, if you're looking at it through part of it, I mean, we want to tell you a grade, even though I kind of did, because that's looking at it through a critical lens, but it's just the execution of the story and the details and the critical thinking of it. things just don't add up. But overall, it's fun. So this is like a 1.75. And here's why I recommend it. In this trade version, cover price of it way back when it came out in the late 80s, $3.95. Wow, $3.95. This is out of print. You're not going to get this trade easily, and if you might get on eBay, you're probably going to pay a little bit for it simply because it's out of print. But the back issue in this are all over dollar bins. They are readily accessible, so you can get this story on the cheap if you just want just a fun story without looking again through that critical lens. The Jim Aparo art. I mean, come on, it's Jim Aparo art. So yes, so a 1.75 out of 5 with my recommendation. Check it out. But that said, only get it if you can get it on the cheap. Don't, if you're getting it on eBay and you see it for like $30, heck no, pass on it. No. For the casual Batman fan, just you can. This is accessible in back issues and get it on cheap that way. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the many deaths of the Batman. Hit me up in the comments below if you read this story, and we can kind of back chat about it and share some critiques. I'm sure similar critiques will be out there. And if you read it and enjoyed it, let's talk about what is the enjoyable parts of it. Because again, there are some enjoyable parts of it. You just have to go in the right frame of mind. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the many deaths of Batman. And until the next video, take care.